you have to make space for each person to communicate their selves and their feelings and their thoughts. So that's a big piece of it. And tactical empathy means you don't have to agree with or even embody how the other person is feeling, but you have to understand how they're feeling and where they're coming from.
This is your Kick-Ass Life podcast, episode number 359 with guest Alex Jamieson.
This is the Your Kick-Ass Life podcast with Andrea Owen, a no BS guide to self-help and badassery. Because ladies, let's face it, life's too short for it to not kick ass. And here's your host, the girl who serves it up straight with a side of crazy, Andrea Owen.
Hey there, ass kickers. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I am so glad that you are here and so incredibly grateful that you spend time with me, whether you're in the car, whether you are working out. I know some of you listen to my podcast while you're in the shower. Hi. And when you're cooking, just all kinds of places that you are. I appreciate you so, so much. I wanted to mention that if you have not read my very first book, I know a lot of you either found this podcast or maybe you were already a listener and you read How to Stop Feeling Like Shit or listened to it on audiobook. But a lot of you haven't read my very first book, which is 52 Ways to Live a Kick-Ass Life. BS-free wisdom to ignite your inner badass and live the life you deserve. How much do I love that subtitle? It is also on audiobook. So if you have some backed up credits like I do, I have 7 credits that I need to use. Oh my gosh. It is over there on Audible and it is all the major retailers at bookstores, on Amazon, Target.com, all of those places. It's one of those books that I specifically wrote so that you can just jump to any chapter that calls out to you. There's 52 chapters. They're all really short, so you can check out the table of contents and you're like, this one sounds interesting, or I need to work on this. Just jump to it and get, bite-sized wisdom that's from me, so you always know that it's BS free. All right, so we have a returning guest today. Alex Jamieson is back on the podcast. She has a new book that came out that she wrote with her husband all about communication. Anytime someone is an expert on communication, I am all ears because personally, I never learned how to do this. I just thought you communicate by, blurting out what was on your mind without any filters. Sometimes being confrontational, like that's what you needed to do to get your point across. Well, apparently that's not how it works. I learned the hard way, which I know many of you probably have as well. So I love any type of process that comes along that's easy to remember so that when I do have something hard to communicate, it doesn't even really need to be hard, but just anything important to communicate, that I know what to do. I know what to say ahead of time to make sure that I show up as my best self. I can be proud of how I showed up in that conversation, really regardless of how it turns out. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So for those of you that don't know Alex, let me tell you a little bit about her. Alexandra Jamieson is the best-selling author of 5 books and co-creator/co-star of the Oscar-nominated documentary Super Size Me. She is a highly sought-after success mentor and motivational guide for thousands and has made it her mission to empower women to create epic lives. Her work has been praised by Oprah, The Today Show, Dr. Oz, Goop, Martha Stewart Living, The New York Times, and many others. As a lifelong learner, her wellness expertise has grown out of a decade of experience, as well as her education at the Natural Gourmet Institute, the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, and a certification in applied positive psychology. So without further ado, here is Alex. Alex, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me back.
I think that it's applicable, this book. You and I were chatting before about all the goings on of what's, happening now in 2020 and hard conversations needing to have happen. And you wrote this amazing book with your husband. And I want to jump in And I'm super curious because, I know that the work that you do with women, and, you sent me the email that you had written this book with your husband about tough conversations. So what inspired you to write this book?
It's funny how you realize why you did something after you've done it.
Okay.
We had reasons for why we wrote it in the first place, but I'm seeing a lot more reasons why now. So I'll tell you, the initial inspiration was my now husband, Bob, and I, and we've been together about 9 years. We were together for a few years. I have been a coach for 20 years. He's been a consultant for about a decade. And we realized that his corporate work and my individual work, there was a lot of overlap in terms of the problems people were having and the tools that we used. We had different vocabularies, but we found a lot of the same core issues. I always used to joke with him that he's basically dealing with people who are reconstructing their toxic family systems in the workplace.
Oh, true. People bring all their stuff to work.
They do. We actually got asked by some friends of ours to teach a small private workshop for couples. And we had like 4 or 5 couples over. And I'm so sorry, I'm in New York City and there's just going to be traffic noises in the background.
You sort of can't avoid it. It's either that or sirens or garbage trucks, like something. Yes,
it's a
we
very
forgive
glamorous podcasting life here. Beep, beep, beep. Here we go.
Yeah.
So we taught this workshop. And the first thing that we realized was, people are coming to this workshop. Couples are coming together for very different reasons. Like it was basically a lot of women dragging their male partners, I'll be honest.
Okay. Yeah.
And we realized, they're not on the same page about why they're here. And we have to get everybody into a lot, like, let's get clear about what brought people here. So we threw this workshop together for couples, and we realized we had to get the couples on the same page about why they were there together. It was obvious that one person was feeling obliged to be there, and the other had some issues they needed to work out with the other person. So we came up with this really simple, clarifying conversation for everyone based on a whole bunch of different work and tools that we had used. And Andrea, I tell you what, we're a little slow on the uptake. We taught this workshop a couple times, and this was the one tool that people kept asking us about. People kept texting and calling and emailing. What was that 4-part conversation again? What was that 4-part thing? I have to have another tough conversation. Can you walk me through it again? And we realized, people keep asking for this one tool. We got to put this in a Google spreadsheet. And that's how it eventually became a book, because people kept asking for this thing. And then we kept using it in our work, and we kept using it in our marriage, and then with our son. And it became this all-purpose way to bring 2 or more people into alignment about tough topics.
So what are some situations in which we can use them? And where did you see these people? Like, did they come in for help for one thing and then it ended up helping them in other situations in their life?
So they were, the first workshop was about their sexual relationship.
Okay.
And where they wanted it to go. So this is a tough topic for a lot of people.
You guys went in the deep end.
We really did.
Yeah, wow.
We really did. And, usually there's one person there's like a high desire partner and a low desire partner. And that's tricky emotional ground to go over together. So we used it initially for that. And we're like, well, if it works for this, let's try it. Let's try it for our vacation plan. So we would use it for, going to visit toxic family members. We would use it with our son for the first day of school, like kicking off the school year. Or, I share my son with his dad. We co-parent. So, I would have conversations with my son or with his father about how we were parenting. We would have, actually, Bob and I had used the conversation over and over again to decide to get married and then to plan our wedding.
Okay. So it sounds like it kind of can bleed out into other areas of your life with whomever and whatever situation.
Yeah, we've gotten feedback from, teams that work at technology companies that use it to kick off a project. Bob has used it in boardrooms with the C-suite, the executives about, pivoting their company's mission. And then we've had middle school teachers reach out to us and say, I'm now using this to teach my kids how we're going to interact together in the classroom. And our mutual friend, Rebecca Barucki of Beck's Life, she's really the reason why we finally wrote this book, because she was so adamant that this process changed her marriage and how she parents her 5 children. She's like, you guys have got to put this in a book. It changed my life.
Yeah, it's really interesting that, I think there's so many gaps in public school and they just honestly can't touch all of them with the limited time and resources that they have. But communication, I believe, is one of them. And I think so many problems can be solved by just 2 people having a thoughtful and healthy and mature conversation, but we don't know how to do that. So tell us about, how do we fall into traps of bad communication? Which I feel like a lot of times is the norm.
Oh, it's completely the norm. It's not just schools. Where would teachers learn how to do this?
Right.
I grew up in a family where important emotional or high stakes conversations got not physically violent, but emotionally violent. They were terrifying to me as a child. So I learned to avoid talking about important topics. I was terrified to bring up emotional topics. We had a kind of a traumatized family. There was addiction and mental health issues. So I was the people-pleasing, perfectionistic good girl. I was the smoother over, the diplomat. So I didn't learn how to have tough topics until my 30s, really. And most people grow up in homes where they are not taught by their parents. They're not modeled, mature, clear communication strategies.
Yeah, I heard some parenting advice somewhere along the way that talked about if you ever have a disagreement or an argument in front of your children, make sure that you also model for them you coming back together and making up. Because a lot of times what happens is, you do end up making up with your partner and smoothing things over somehow, but the children don't see that. And so they just see the disagreement or feel the tension in the house, and then they don't ever see how it was remedied. And I thought that was really interesting to kind of show the entire the whole cycle of what that can look like.
Absolutely. And, there's other kind of truisms about relationship that Bob and I have examined, through the writing of the book. And we're like, oh, these are actually things that we don't do, or there's certain things that we're very clear that we do in how we relate together as a couple, and then how we model that and share that with our son. And one of them that we decided was the most horrible advice you can give to anyone. That whole never go to sleep angry thing.
That is the worst. Let's just say it right now.
It's the worst. I'll tell you what, we have a whole chapter in the book about times you should not communicate, to take a break from each other if you're exhausted.
Right.
My husband, God bless him, he would always get more energy before bed and then want to talk about something really important. Whereas I have no willpower left. I'm exhausted and I'm like, don't talk to me. And then he would want to get into something heavy, which would just evolve into misunderstandings and hurt feelings. And we finally realized, I was like, we cannot, if you have something important to talk about, please schedule a time with me tomorrow when I'm awake.
Yeah.
I am not awake.
And I can be my best self.
Yeah, exactly. When you're tired, you're not present. The other things that we avoid are you hungry? Is either of you hungry? Have you not eaten in a while? Either one of us can pause the conversation. Hey, I need to eat first and then let's talk. Or have you eaten in a while? And the other one is, if either of us have had even one glass of alcohol, we do not go oh, you had a glass of wine with dinner. You know what? Let's pause this conversation until tomorrow. We don't even drink that often, but So of course I'm a total lightweight. So even a half a glass of wine and I have no filter and I'm like not patient, not really listening. So conversations just don't go as well.
That's interesting and important. I don't drink anymore. I have almost 9 years at the end of September of sobriety. And, but I used to, when I was drinking, and I wasn't like you, like I would have drank like 3 glasses of wine. And then I suddenly want to have a heart to heart with my husband, which is not helpful at all. I wasn't remembering what I was talking about the day before. And it wasn't clear. It just doesn't work. I'm interrupting this conversation to share a few words about some of our wonderful sponsors. Voting should be free, fair, safe, and easy to access. The 2020 election presents us with a call to rise and fight those who plot and mobilize to undermine our right to vote. Those in power erect barriers to hold on to that power and prevent people of color, young people, and people with disabilities from exercising our right to share our vision for America. Whether making it harder to register and stay on the rolls, closing polling places, or rejecting lawful ballots, opponents of our democracy continue to deploy a host of tactics that threaten fair representation. You don't have to wait until November 3rd to cast your ballot. Be an October voter. In most states, you can vote early in October. Request your mail ballot, return your completed ballot in the mail or in person, or vote early at an early voting location. There's no time to waste. Treat every day like Election Day to make sure all voices are heard. Make a plan to vote. Be an October voter. Visit andstillivote.org to join the fight for voting rights today. That's andstillivote.org. Paid for by the Leadership Conference Education Fund. We are supported by Green Chef. In March, my husband became a stay-at-home dad and took from me the role of planning, shopping for, and cooking dinner. Since he'd never done this before, we were looking for a solution to make this giant task easier. Green Chef recipes are quick and easy with step-by-step instructions, chef tips, and photos to guide you along. They have a diverse array of meal plans with plenty of options to choose from each week. Just one of the meals that we had that was so amazing, orange sesame chicken salad. Y'all, it was so good. It said that it served 2, but I think it could have easily been 3. There was some left over, and I was so happy when I asked my husband, do you want the rest of it? And he said no, because then I began shoveling it just straight from the big salad bowl and ate the rest of it. With Green Chef's wide variety of high-quality, clean ingredients, you can feel great about what you're eating and how it got to your table. Green Chef is a USDA-certified organic company. Meal plans include vegan, vegetarian, paleo, and keto. Go to greenchef.com/kickass80 and use code kickass80 to get $80 off across 4 boxes, including free shipping on your first box. Again, that's greenchef.com. Use code kickass80. And thank you for supporting our sponsors, because that in turn supports this show. And now back to my conversation with Alex. I'm curious about, you may have already answered this, so forgive me, but you talk about the missing conversation, and that's the common culprit in miscommunication. So can you speak more on that missing conversation?
Yeah, so the missing conversations are, it can either be really important details within a topic that just get breezed over, right? We make assumptions, especially if we've been with our partner for a long time. We make assumptions about how they may feel or what they may be thinking. We may do it with our kids too. We may think that we know them better than they know themselves. And in some cases that may be true, but you have to make space for each person to communicate their selves and their feelings and their thoughts. So that's a big piece of it. And when we go through, I would love to model the 4 steps of the conversation in a moment. But when you go through it, the conversation structure, we call it the AllIn Method, it asks you specific questions that are usually completely ignored about important topics. And when we make assumptions and then take action based assumptions, people get hurt, right? Relationships get damaged, and then bad habits just keep perpetuating themselves.
I see. Yes. That is actually something that I have tried to become so much better at with the people in my life, especially like you said, my kids and my husband, that when I find myself talking to them and about to say something, or it does come out of my mouth, making an assumption about how they feel or what they were thinking based on their actions or just their body language or whatever, I use that phrase that we often use in our world of, I'm making up that, or, my assumption is that this, and then I put the question on them, like, am I right about that? Or am I wrong? Is it something else? And I have found that, you know what? A lot of times I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh, I'm so glad that I asked because I totally assumed something else.
Yeah. And it's, I think, and Andrea, I'd love to hear what you think about this. I think it's particularly tricky, and it's a trap that people like us who are coaches, and we're actually really good at doing this with our clients. We should not be coaches in our relationships. Unless specifically asked by our partners to coach them.
100%.
Right? Yeah. It's not fair, and we're not always accurate with the people closest to us.
I also find that, and I think a lot of my listeners can relate to that, even if they're not coaches or therapists, but because they tend to be all in with personal development and they know a lot, they're very self-aware. I'm going to give them that. I tend to come to a conversation, especially a difficult, vulnerable conversation, and put on my quote unquote expert hat and my coach hat because it's less vulnerable for me. Because if I just show up as my raw, kind of naked self, that's a lot more difficult and scary and risky for me than if I come in as the expert and the all-knowing. It's very much like know-it-all-ish, let me tell you. And it's maybe a little bit even contemptuous at times, which I have to be very, very careful of that.
Right. Well, one of the experts that we are inspired by in our book, Radical Alignment, and we refer to him a lot, is this man, Chris Voss, who was an FBI hostage negotiator.
I think I watched him on that, what is that? Mastery? Yes, Masterclass. Yeah. I watched his. Yeah, it was really good.
His work is really fascinating. And he talks about how listening is a martial art. And you have to develop tactical empathy with the other person, whether it's your client or your husband or your child. And tactical empathy means you don't have to agree with or even embody how the other person is feeling, but you have to understand how they're feeling and where they're coming from.
Yes. And that takes, well, you tell me, like, what do you think that learning how to do that takes? My first thing is like, it takes a lot of patience and a lot of like putting your ego aside.
Well, so there definitely is an ego check, right? You were just saying a moment ago that you have to be careful of not stepping into important conversations with your expert hat on.
Right.
I sometimes have to do the same thing, right? Not making assumptions that I know anything, but also, again, growing up in the family system that I did, I think a lot of people will relate to this. I thought in order to have a tough conversation, somebody was going to win and somebody was going to lose.
Right.
So I had to come prepared to argue to the death and defend my point of view and be right. And if I didn't know, like with 10 sets of facts to back up every point, then I would just not have the conversation because I didn't want to lose because that felt horrible. So I avoided tons of conversations in my life, which, I'm on marriage too. That who knows what could have happened differently. But what has changed in using the AllIn Method, and I use it every day. I use it by myself to plan things. I use it with my family in my work. What's happened is I've switched from that win-lose mentality to, we're going to figure this out together. I don't have to know the answer. In fact, I cannot know the answer if I'm in conversation with someone else, even if it's with my 13-year-old. He has information and feelings that need into account. So I know as much as they know, maybe less.
Yeah. Whew. That's some grown-up conversations right there.
Emotional maturity at 45, finally.
That is adulting. Well, I want to ask you about the 4 steps in the AllIn method in just a second, but what you were just talking about made me think about just women in general. And yes, we're going to be generalizing here, but when you were talking about your childhood, it made me think and wonder, as women growing up in a patriarchal culture where we are taught that, for the most part, that men are in charge. And I think that this can have its effect on us when we walk into conversations, feeling like we need to step back a little bit and make more room for the other person, especially if it's a man. What have you seen when you're training people around this and having conversations with both men and women?
Yeah. So here's the beauty of what we teach with the AllIn Method. There's something called team psychological safety that we go into in the book. And psychological safety means that the people in a group, and that can mean a couple, the people in a group feel they have determined for themselves that this is a safe place to take interpersonal risks, to be vulnerable, to share ideas. Okay, so you are the only one who can determine if you feel safe. Mm-hmm. And one of the concrete studied ways, one of the only ways that psychological safety is created is that you get equal speaking time.
Oh.
So yes. Now,
aren't there apps that track that?
I just use the timer
on
my phone. You don't need an app to say, I talked 6 minutes yesterday, but you talked, that's way too complicated for me. But there's studies at Google, studies from Harvard that show equal speaking time in the room is what creates psychological safety. And then I'll take it back to my marriage. My husband is more of a verbal processor. So without the timer, he will just go on and on and on because that's how he processes and integrates information. I am more of an internal processor. So I actually need to be alone or even take a full 30 seconds to think before I speak. Mm-hmm. So in that kind of dynamic, or as Rebecca, who wrote our foreword for the book, she's like, I will steamroller over my lovely husband because my energy is just bigger.
Right.
And that does not create a safe dynamic in a relationship. So that's why in the AllIn Method, we actually tell you time each other. Each person gets 3 or 4 or 5 minutes per step. You set the timer. It feels weird at first, but that's actually what creates the safe container.
Okay. I like that a lot. My marriage dynamic is a lot like Rebecca's, and big energy over here, external processor, steamroller. Okay. So let's move into the 4 steps of the AllIn Method, which you also call AIM.
Great. So, there's a couple of very simple pieces that you just agree to before, like ground rules before. The first is the equal speaking time. The other is that you're not going to talk over each other. You're just going to listen to each other. This isn't like even problem solving time. You're just getting equal time to share these 4 different buckets. And the next piece, and this is so simple, but I tell you what, this has been revolutionary and life-changing for me. What's the topic? What one thing are we talking about here? Right? Because
that's important.
It's no joke. This is why I was so scared to bring up conversations in the past, because in my family, you could end up talking about dinner, but then 5 minutes later, you're talking about how so-and-so in the family screwed you over 13 years ago, and now you're redressing all of the horrible things that have ever happened in your family, right?
Yes. Well, you know what? The first thing that popped into my mind when you said that is because I've been in conversations before where, I'm the one who musters up the courage to have a hard conversation with someone. And then that person uses that as an in to share their beef about something else. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's not fair. Like we're not talking about that. And I always felt like you're using my courage as a jumping off point to do your beef when that was actually on you.
Right. And so that is why we have outlined with this, like when you invite someone to a tough conversation, you can just simply ask them, email them, or text them in advance. I'd like to talk about topic X with you. Can we agree to just we'll share equally about these 4 things and we'll just stick to this topic in this conversation. And it's magic, seriously. And if somebody cannot agree to those things with you, then maybe they're not a safe person to have this conversation with yet.
Yeah. Oh, that's tough too. Okay.
It is. And it may feel weird, but I tell you what, game changing, totally changes relationship dynamics. So let me walk you through the 4 steps. And I can talk you through how we used this for COVID vacation conversations that we've had in the last few months. So the topic,
trying to decide if you're what you're going to do or if you're going to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then it's very, you can easily translate this into, what do we do with the kids for school, for the changing dynamics there.
Yeah.
So the topic was, do we go to my mother-in-law's 90th birthday party and the niece's wedding?
Okay. Which a lot of people are having to make those decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. So you first share, the 4 topics are: you share your intentions, concerns, boundaries, and dreams about this specific topic. So your intentions are your why. Why would you even want to do this thing? What are the broad strokes? And it can be really simple. I want to see family. I want to get out of the house. I want to take a road trip. I want to be there for this life event. Or it could be something like, I feel obligated to go visit your family. I feel like if I don't go, they'll all hate me.
Right. All valid intentions.
All valid. Yeah. So, that one's usually the shortest one. It kind of sets the stage. And again, give each other 2 minutes to do this. The second one is, what are your concerns about this topic? What are all of your fears and worries? And we really encourage you to be as vulnerable as vulnerable as feels safe, right? Depending on the situation and the person, you may not want to be completely revealing, right? If it's a work situation or whatever, but I'm talking to my husband. We know each other well. We know the situation. And our fears were really similar. I was concerned that, we'd go and get sick, or we'd go and get his 90-year-old mom sick, or, are we going to stay in a hotel? What's that going to be like? I'm worried about staying in a hotel. That just feels uncomfortable. I'm worried that I won't be able to relax, that I'll come home feeling more exhausted than when we left. I'm worried that if we don't go, that again, the family will hate me. They'll blame it all on me because I'm the one who has all these rules.
Yeah. All valid.
All valid. And he had slightly different concerns. He's like, if I don't go, my brother's going to, verbally abuse me for hours. If we do go, my family's really mean and teases us. So I can't win.
Right.
So you just really uncover what the fears are. And why this is so important, it actually has a calming effect on your amygdala and your nervous system when you share your fears out loud in a safe space. It actually has a soothing effect when your partner is just there listening to you. And you're like, okay, I said my worst fears out loud and I'm still alive. And look, they're still here. Okay. Then you each share your boundaries. Now, again, this is one of those missing conversations. What do you think of these 2 questions when you're trying to figure out your boundaries for something? What do you need to be your best? And what do you need to feel safe? So for me to be my best, I usually don't want to make that trip, driving 5 hours there and 5 hours back in the same day.
Yeah.
I usually want to stay overnight, and usually 2 nights, so that I'm not turning around, rushing back the next day. But in this situation, I have different boundaries. Actually, this time I don't want to stay in a hotel, and I don't even want to go into a roadside rest area. So we're going to pull over and I'm going to pee by the side of the freeway if I need to. I don't feel safe going into, here on the East Coast, we have these rest areas that are it's like a mall. And
yeah, they are nice. I had
a
friend from the West Coast comment on our rest stops in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
They are really nice.
But it's a lot of people. Lots of people didn't feel safe with that. But also my boundaries once we get there, I don't want to go inside any homes, unless it's to use the restroom real quick. I won't hug anybody. We're going to wear our masks the whole time. So we just went through what all of our safety boundaries were. And then what I need to feel my best. Okay, we got to bring food with us that's really tasty. So we have good snacks and good music in the car. And how can we make this feel as good as possible if we go? And then your partner shares their boundaries. And think of them as starter boundaries, right? They don't have to be perfectly formed yet. And you're not ordering off a menu. You're not making demands. Mm-hmm. And when you hear the other person's boundaries, try not to take them personally. Actually, with the whole conversation, whatever the other person is sharing, we've gotten to the point, we think this is really important when we teach. Whatever you hear the other person saying, even if it's the fear that involves you, it's their fear. It's not, don't take it personally. So if we can go into a conversation with that understanding, it's so much easier for us to be vulnerable together.
I love that you said that because I could see, especially the boundaries thing, people taking that as a literal demands list, like some diva who only wants green M&Ms and you know what I mean? But no, it's not. It's just, here are the things I need to feel to be my best. It doesn't mean I have to have every single one of them in order to say yes. Is that kind of how I'm reading it?
Absolutely. And I love that you brought up the green M&Ms because that story, I think it was actually Van Halen, the band, that put that in their rider when they would perform in these huge megadomes. They said, we only want brown M&Ms in the green room. And why they did that is because they knew once they arrived at the green room, if there were only brown M&Ms, that somebody had actually taken the time to read all of their needs and that they were going to be safe and well taken care of. If those details were glossed over, right, these are huge arenas and there's a lot of safety issues. It's a very dangerous place to perform. So they actually put it in there as a red flag that our performance might not be up to safety measures. So we're going to have our team go through and check everything again.
Interesting.
How smart is that? And
I didn't know the background of that story. So I love that. Yeah.
So the last part of the conversation is my favorite, and we specifically put it at the end because it brings you back together as a team. You share your dreams. And this is where you go big, you get expansive. If this thing were to go extremely well, better than, we could even hope, what would be true? And you really start future casting, how will I feel? What will I experience? And so, we had two outcomes that were really clear. One was we have great memories that we've created together as a family. And the other is nobody gets sick. Mm-hmm. That was honestly the most important thing for us. So it did help us make decisions for our family with all of the important pieces known. There was nothing missing. And why it's so important to end on dreams together is you actually start releasing oxytocin together when you get into that expansive thinking and sharing space. And when you release oxytocin together, you are chemically bonding together. You actually come back together. And when you hear somebody else's dreams, it's almost impossible for you to not want that for them too.
Right.
And then they hear yours and they want your dreams for you. So then you are in this mindset together where you're all right, we're going to work together on this as a team. We're going to find the best possible solutions. And we've seen this work. It has worked in our marriage countless times with our son, again, with tech teams, with leadership teams, with my private coaching clients. It gets you so far, so fast, and you get so clear that, I've never used another system that worked this well.
It's fascinating. And well, now I'm curious, did you guys end up going to the birthday party?
So because of our conversations, the family actually, for once, listened to our needs and they pushed it a month. So instead of doing it at the beginning of August, it's now happening at the end of September. And my husband is going by himself.
Okay.
I'm staying home because that felt safest, and it felt like it took everybody's needs into account, and we feel really good about that decision.
Good. Oh my gosh. I just want to say again, the book is Radical Alignment: How to Have Game-Changing Conversations That Will Transform Your Business and Your Life. The link will be in the show notes for everybody. And I'm going to tell everybody where to go to find out more about you. You have the most fascinating background in a few different areas, but I want to ask one more question that I think is important. I think where a lot of people get stuck. I mean, you can tell me, but it's the invitation to a high stakes conversation. I've heard so many people say, I haven't had the best luck having hard conversations with my boss or my partner or my child. How do I invite them and have them hopefully say yes?
Yeah, great. So the last thing anyone wants to hear is we need to talk.
We need to talk. Oh my God. No.
No. My fight or
the answer
flight
is no.
Automatically kicks in, right? So what I do, and I have used this with such success in business and personal, you ask someone, hey, can we talk about X on Saturday? Give like 4 or 5 days to talk about a topic. Recently, I also emailed my aunt and uncle because I had some old family mythology that I needed to straighten out with them. I emailed them and I said, hey guys, I would love to talk about this thing. Can we email back and forth about this? Like, I want to get clear about some stuff. I want to understand some things. And I love you guys so much. And these things are hard for me to talk about on the phone. Would you be willing to email about it? And they were like, sure, we'd be happy to. So even though I have a very close relationship with them and I can call them on the phone, we've been emailing about some really heavy emotional topics, and it's been wonderful. With my son, I will put a Post-it note and I'll put it in his room because, he sleeps till noon because he's 13. I'll put it in his room and I'll say, hey, good morning. I'll see you at lunch. And hey, at some point today, we need to talk about X. Let me know when you want to do that. So I empower them to choose the time and I let them know in advance. And it's a friendly invitation. So that's my best advice.
I love that. It sounds like the key is that you tell them what the topic is instead of having them wonder and go through 37 different scenarios.
Right. We need to talk. Could be anything.
Could be literally anything. And that is so scary. One thing I do, and I don't know if this is good or not, but when I need to talk to one of my children, I'll say, can you come downstairs? We need to talk to you. You're not in trouble.
Oh, yeah.
Because the vast majority of the time, they're not.
Right.
But the times I don't say that, then they start sweating.
Yeah. And actually what we've done with a lot of either in team trainings or in my work with one partner and a couple, I'll say, print out the cheat sheet from the book and give it to them in advance. Like, hey, I'd love to talk about topic X and let's use these points to help guide our conversation. So give it to them in advance so they have time to look at it and think about it. So you're not springing it on them and then having to facilitate the conversation. You've both had time to think about it.
That sounds very a conversation that is co-created, as we like to say in the coaching world, instead of one person being the boss.
Because again, I don't know all the answers.
Right. I love it. So again, Radical Alignment: How to Have Game-Changing Conversations That Will Transform Your Business and Your Life. Alex, thank you so much. Where do you want to send people to learn more about you? We'll obviously put the links in the show notes for the book, but what else?
Yeah. You know what? I love to hang out on Instagram. You can find me there at @DeliciousAlex.
Amazing. I have so enjoyed this conversation. This is such an important topic and one that everyone can relate to because we all have relationships with people. We all have conversations. And I just appreciate the work that you do in the world and trying to get people to come together and love one another and take care of each other a little bit better. So thank you so much. Was there anything that got left out that you feel like you need to still say?
You know what? There's one last thing. I use this by myself. I go through my intentions, concerns, boundaries, and dreams for myself about my own questions, projects, and problems all the time. It's a great journaling exercise.
Interesting. And I love the simplicity of it. It's simple, but powerful.
Yeah. Simple works.
It packs a punch.
Thanks
you
for having me.
Yeah, it's been so fun. And the other link to the show that Alex was on before where we talked about very different things, but also very important, that's in the show notes. And everyone, you know how important I understand that your time is, and I appreciate that you spend it here with me and my guests. And until next time, everyone, I will see you all out in cyberspace. Bye-bye.